Welcome to the One Stiletto in the Grave podcast with your hosts, Sonny Ormond and Jane James.
We have a jolly good show for you today, darlings. It's jokey in every way. Well, it's good to laugh, whether you're sitting down or standing up. And our glorious guest does stand up quite a lot. She's wickedly funny and is actually... she's sitting down with us today. It's the fabulous Angela Barnes. Today's podcast is sponsored by MTL Associates. Would you love a website but don't know where to start? MTL Associates create websites for people like you. They'll agree a fixed price for their work from just £380 for 5 pages, and before you sign up, they'll create a prototype so you can see you're getting great quality. And when they build the real thing, they'll keep changing it until you're 100% happy, and you own the website, not them. Go to mtlassociates.co.uk and see what they can do for you. MTL Associates. It's you, but online. Welcome, everyone. Now, today, Jane and I are so thrilled to have as our guest one of the funniest, hard-working, most intelligent and downright nicest comedians you could ever wish to meet. And she's also very patient, but more of that anon. You will have seen her on TV shows like Mock the Week and Live at the Apollo, and you will have heard her on the radio, on the News Quiz, News Jack, and our own show, You Can't Take It With You, and on her brilliant podcast, We Are History. Oh, and yes, as she says herself, she is also a lifelong fan of the Archers. Yippee! She is, of course, the wonderful Angela Barnes.
Oh, thank you for having me. What an introduction. I'm pretending I heard it for the first time as well.
Yes, we just had a few little glitches, didn't we?
Just a couple of gremlins in the works today. Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, no, it's really nice of you to be here. And I mean, this all came about because you're such a fan of the Archers, which we found out when we heard you on, I think on Mike Fenton Stevens' podcast.
Oh, on the time capsule, yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Archers then. So, have you really been listening all your life? What got you hooked on it?
I have. Well, it was always on in the house. My mum would listen to it. You know, when I was little, like while cooking the dinner or doing the ironing or whatever, she would have it on, and I never really engaged with it because it was just that thing that mum listened to. But then when I was a bit older and I went away to university, I started listening to it because it was like a little connection to home. But I was I was a closet Archers listener because you couldn't in the 90s you couldn't be 18 and tell people you were sneaking off to your room in the halls of residence to listen to the Archers at 7 o'clock every night. So for many years it was my dirty little secret, you know. But now I'm out and proud. Now I think it's perfectly acceptable now.
Of course, in those days you had to listen to it at 7 o'clock, I guess, didn't you?
Yeah, there was no podcast.
It
was either 7 o'clock or the omnibus. And, you know, when I was a student, I wasn't up at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. So that was the omnibus out. So, yeah, 7 o'clock, I'd sneak off and then go back to my cans of lager and being a student again afterwards as if nothing had happened.
Now, I was thrilled because it was our 70th anniversary, the Archers anniversary, last year. And I was thrilled because I was listening to Woman's Hour and you were invited on as a guest. And you said that Lillian was your favourite character.
She is.
And that's how we started our little Twitter
and then you followed me on Twitter and I was just... Because my husband is, you know, he overhears the Archers occasionally, but he's not an Archers fan, not a listener. And I just kept going, Lillian Bellamy's following me on Twitter. And he just looked at me blankly. Like, you don't understand what a big deal this is. And I'm sure, Sonny, you get this all the time, but it's so nice to hear your voice. But I'm looking at you going, well, it's funny because Lillian's voice is coming out of someone else's face. Because that's not Lillian's face in my head.
I know, darling, I'm sorry to have disappointed you. Look, I'll get a plastic bag and I'll stick it over my head for the entire podcast recording. But, you know, it's funny that you say that because, you know, some people do say, gosh, you're exactly what I thought Lillian would look like. And other people like you say, oh, no, sorry, you don't look anything like her. You know. So I'm sorry about that. Close your eyes.
But it is what's sort of beautiful about the Archers, I think, is because, you know, particularly with a character like Lillian that I've known for 20 years or whatever, it's such a fixed image in your head that you get of what these people look like. And then when you do see, I remember I did a thing once, because I've sort of become a professional Archers fan in many ways. So I get sort of invited to do things that are Archers related. And when that episode when Rob Titchener finally left the village, I did an interview. I interviewed him on, it was like a Facebook Live thing for Radio 4. And so they played the episode, and I listened to the episode, sat next to, I can't remember the actor's name, isn't that terrible? But I was sat next to him, listening to the episode, and then I had to interview him straight afterwards. And I was just like, I'm so angry with you. I know you're the actor, but I can't believe I've got to be nice to you now. Because these people are real in your head, you know. And so, yeah.
Yeah, of course they are. And Tim, I mean, it was a terrific storyline, that, wasn't it? And
incredible.
You know, Tim and Louisa, you know, who played the parts, they were brilliant, actually. And he particularly was terribly good. I mean, I didn't have many scenes to do with Rob Titchener, but I remember to have one with him sort of latterly. And, you know, just when he opened his mouth as that character of Rob, in the particular episode I was in, I thought, oh God, he's quite unnerving. And he is such the nicest person in the world. He is so different from Rob, isn't he? He's a very clever actor.
Man. But he managed to convey that. It's so, I mean, it was a difficult listen in places, that storyline. It was incredible. And I think that was a storyline that did so much for so many people that were in that sort of coercive control relationship, you know, to see that represented. And he really got across that thing that somebody who's like that is so charming and so, you know, on the surface, such a perfect person. And then, you know, it all comes out behind closed doors, all of that. It was so well portrayed. And particularly when he's doing that, you know, just with his voice. I'm in awe of Archer's actors. I really am. Really am.
Yeah, it is interesting because, you know, you're trying to create a three-dimensional character just with your voice. And of course, the great thing about the Archers in that particular storyline as well is that we can take the time. Unlike TV, you know, soaps where they have to get through stories very, very quickly. The great thing about that was we could take the time, which of course is what happens, isn't it, with coercive control?
Well,
so it worked really well for that story.
It's a slow build-up, isn't it? Yeah, it's all the charm and the, you know, they call it love bombing, don't they, at the start of the relationship, all of that, and then the slow reveal of who this person is. It was incredibly powerful and hard to listen to in places. But that again is the great thing about the Archers, because you've got a storyline like that is so dark and difficult, but there's so much comic relief in the Archers that you do get let off the hook a bit every now and then. You know, when something's really tough, you'll then get a scene with Eddie Grundy, or you'll then get a scene with, you know, to give you a bit of respite. I mean, one of my new favourites is, I mean, she'll never overtake Lillian, obviously, but Tracy Horrobin. I just think...
Oh, we love her.
Oh, Tracy and Chelsea, what absolute stars. Now we sort of have the internet and everything. It's funny because I've met Susie Riddell, who's great, and... But so Tracy Horrobin to me looks like her because I've met her and she's on Twitter or whatever. Right. But all the older characters who are around sort of pre-internet, pre-social media, they don't look like the actor. It's really interesting that sort of that now you get to see the people that play them. Yeah.
But the Horrobins really have taken a very prominent place, and quite rightly too, in the Archers. And again, fine actors. Susie's wonderful, and as indeed Maddie, who's come in to play Chelsea. What do you think of the pairing of Tracy and Jazza?
I think I punched the air when that happened. It was such a great, because it could only be Tracy because of the way Jazza is. You know, so many relationships just wouldn't have been believable. But those two just are. You could see that Tracy is the person who could tame Jazza, who could stop him, you know, doing what he does on his milk rounds or whatever. So it was really, really believable and their relationship's so lovely. And what's been really nice recently as well is seeing them, those that were essentially comic characters, being really fleshed out and having proper dramatic storylines and proper, you know, while still being able to have that little bit of comic relief. I just think they're brilliant, the Horrobins. Yeah,
no, that they are.
Tracy and Chelsea just sound so much like mother and daughter, don't they?
They really do.
They really do.
And those accents are great. Like, they must have worked so hard to get the accents just right, because they're not easy accents to do, are they? That it's such a specific part of the country it's from.
Yeah,
it's great. I'm so in awe of it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. Yeah. So this is a little interesting question for you. If you were able to go to Ambridge, would you stay at Grey Gables or would you stay at Linda's B&B?
Oh my goodness, I'm not sure I'd be welcome at either. I think I'd have to, I don't know. I'd probably end up at the Grundy's, I think. I'll just keep in the cider, shed. Yeah. I mean, I would love to stay with Linda Snell, but I'm not sure she'd love to have me.
Oh, and why do you think Linda wouldn't like to have you?
Oh, maybe I'm doing her a disservice. Maybe I am. I love Linda, and I love their relationship as well, Linda and Robert. Actually, I could see myself sitting in the evenings chatting to Robert. You know, I could. Maybe that is where I'd end up. Yeah.
Oh, you could take a room at the Bull. You could take a room at the Bull.
Oh, yes, of course. They've got rooms at the Bull, haven't they?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I forget they've got rooms at the Bull. Yeah.
You could come and stay with Lydian at the Dower House. That'd be all right.
Oh, very nice. I want to see the new kitchen.
Absolutely. Excuse me. You ain't seen nothing yet until you've seen that kitchen. That smart tap. Marvellous. Marvellous.
And the wine fridge.
And the wine fridge, yeah. Now, is it once true that you gave CPR to the Archer's theme tune?
I did. It's a true story. So when I was a student nurse many years ago, we were taught when we did CPR to get the rhythm right for it, that you do the Archer's theme tune. Like, dun, 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 dun. I mean, now I think they get you to do Staying Alive, which is a bit ironic, but so that's what we were taught. And the only time I've ever had to do CPR sort of in a out of hospital setting, I was in Islington with some friends. We were on our way to a pub quiz, of all things, and there was a car accident. And the gentleman was quite badly injured and wasn't responsive. So I started doing CPR, and then the paramedics came pretty quickly and took over. And when something like that happens, you've just got so much adrenaline sort of coursing through you. And the police officers at the scene took a statement and everything. And then they phoned me the next day to say that the guy was all right, you know, and then he sort of pulled through. And they said... They said that the paramedics had quite a laugh because when they turned up, I was doing CPR, but I was doing the Archer's theme tune out loud. They said it just looked really bonkers. This girl was doing the right thing, going dun 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 dun. I had no idea what I was doing.
That is such a brilliant story. That is absolutely. Oh,
fantastic!
But am I right in thinking that before lockdown, were you due to come to Ambridge and say hello? Am I right?
I'd been invited to come and have a little studio tour and say hello, but then unfortunately pandemic happened, so that never happened. But hopefully one day I'll get to. I mean, lovely Kerry Davies, one of the scriptwriters, follows me on Twitter, and I've met him a couple of times. He came to one of my Edinburgh shows once, and I hint so heavily that there's definitely a part for a little red-headed comedian in there somewhere one day, maybe. But you know, well, maybe one day.
Leave it with me, Angela. Just leave it with me.
Well, I did an event with lovely Jill Archer, Paddy. And she said she'd have a word, but, you know, nothing's happened yet. So we'll see.
Well, these things take time, but, you know, they often do materialise. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you should get on that case, Sonny, very definitely. Just, you mentioned the sort of comedy characters in the Archers. What do you make of the comedy elements in the Archers? Does it hit the spot for you?
It does. I mean... because of that, you know, I don't watch other soaps, really. I don't watch TV soaps. The nice thing about The Archers as well, particularly now, you get it on a podcast or whatever. However busy I am, I can fit in 15 minutes on a podcast, you know, in my car or wherever. So I find it a lot easier to keep up with. But also, it's not that, you know, a lot of soaps on telly, it's just relentless drama. And as Sonny said before, they unfold so quickly that it's not believable. It's not, you know, you're like, oh God, they've just, you know, their mother's just died and now this has happened to them. And then that's like anyone else would, you know, have ended it all by now. So with The Archers, that slow burn means that the drama has proper tension. It's not just all thrown at your face. You properly watch it unfold. So the comedy's really important. So it's not all just bleak otherwise. So those comic characters and of course it's ridiculous, some of it. Of course it's, you know, you've had the whole thing recently with the Kenton's Diary and all of that business.
Yes.
And I just think it's been great, and winding up, you know, Eddie Grundy winding him up and then him getting his own back and all those things that you go, of course that wouldn't happen. Of course that, but it doesn't matter because it's a comic device in a drama to just release the pressure a bit, release the tension, and I'm all there for it. Yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Would you like to write for The Archers, Angela? Would that be fun?
You know, I would love to, but I imagine it's such a tricky job, isn't it? Because you've got to plant those seeds so early on. I'm used to, in stand-up comedy, or writing any sort of comedy really, you've got one thing you're looking for, and that's a laugh. And it's so immediate and in the moment. And you know in that moment whether you've succeeded or failed, because they're either laughing or they're not, you know. Whereas I think if you're writing drama, you don't know till further down the line whether what you've written has been a success or not. Do you know what I mean? You have to wait to see what the feedback then is later on. And that I'm somebody who likes instant gratification, so I like to think I would be wanting to resolve things immediately. You know, I'd be wanting to, rather than that. I think I'd find it really hard to eke things out, or to sort of, you know, let things unfold slowly. I'm all about getting that hit, like gratification immediately. Which is why I think comedy writing suits me better.
It's very different, isn't it? Writing, obviously, for yourself, for stand-up. I mean, and you've recently come back from Edinburgh. I mean, how was that? Because actually, you know, we're getting through the whole COVID thing now. Was it very much like it was pre-COVID this year?
It was, and it was so nice to get back and do a proper Edinburgh. So I hadn't done the Fringe since 2018, because I was due to do it in 2020. I had 2019 away. And then I was going to do it in 2020, and obviously that didn't happen, and 2021 didn't happen. So I was itching to get back and do the Fringe. And it did feel like old times. You know, the rooms, there were no COVID restrictions in the rooms. Some people wore masks if they wanted to, but most people didn't. And I mean, I did get COVID the week I got back, so, you know.
Oh, did you?
I did, yeah. But do you know what? It wasn't, because I thought, oh, this is going to be carnage. Like, everyone in these packed, you know what Edinburgh Fringe rooms are like, packed, sweaty boxes. So I think it's incredible that more people didn't. But it was so nice to be back and doing it. And the Fringe is, I mean, it's exhausting and relentless, but it's so much part of being a stand-up comic in this country that it's just, yeah, it was good to be back and doing it.
And how, I'm interested in, because when you're doing something as intensive as Edinburgh Festival, what is a sort of day like for Angela Barnes when you're doing a show like that? I mean, do you kind of just, can you go out and see other shows, or is it that you just think, I've got to, you know, focus on the show today?
Well, it's sort of changed as I've got older, I think, because I haven't got the energy I had even 10 years ago, you know. So it used to be, Edinburgh 10 years ago, I would do my show, and then I'd do lots of compilation shows and go and do little spots on other shows. You do radio gigs or whatever, and just have a full day of it. Well, I just can't do that now. It's and if I do that, then my show's going to suffer. And I think the way I look at it is, my show is at 7:00 in the evening, and you know, I'm charging people to come to my show. I need to give them the best show I can give them. It's no, you know, if they've paid for a ticket for the show, if I'm hungover or tired, that's not fair. So I sort of try and look after myself a bit more now in Edinburgh. So I don't do as many other gigs as I used to do. I'll do a few. I'll do the odd radio thing or whatever, because it's useful to promote the show, obviously, to go and do things like that. Because the bottom line is, you're doing the show every night for a month, and that's quite a lot of tickets to sell. So, you know, you have to do little bits to remind people that you're there and you're doing it. But I don't do the sort of 4 or 5 gigs a day that I used to do in Edinburgh. And I try and look after, I don't drink when I'm in Edinburgh. I try and swim most days. Swimming is the only exercise I actually like. And so I try and do that, and it's a good sort of head clearer. And, you know, and I sort of meet up. The nice thing about Edinburgh is, you know, as a comedian, people think that we all know each other and hang out together, but obviously we all live in different places, and we all travel in different places. You're gigging all over the country, all over the world. In Edinburgh's that 1 month where there's a lot of your friends in the same city for a whole month. And where I don't have to drive anywhere or get a train anywhere. You know, that's the only month of my year where I'm not driving every day. So that's really nice, to be able to just meet people for lunch and go and have a coffee and a bit of cake. Or so I try to just have a nice calm day, do my show, and then maybe go and see other shows in the evenings. Particularly once my show's bedded in. The first week I tend not to go and see other shows till I'm happy that my show's bedded in and I'm happy with it. And then after that I'll go and watch other shows.
And I guess the show, is the show very different from the start of it to the end of it? I mean, in terms of when you say bedding in, I mean, how honed is it before you actually even open at Edinburgh?
Well, it's funny because so you do a lot of previews with the stand-up show before you take it to Edinburgh. And for me, people have different goals in Edinburgh. So when you're starting out as a comic and you're taking your first solo show or your second solo show to Edinburgh, you want to have it as polished as possible because it's a trade fair, really. You're saying to TV producers or bookers or whatever, look, this is what I can do. So you want it to be the best it can be before you get there. Then a bit further on, the sort of stage I'm at now is my purpose really for doing Edinburgh. TV producers aren't coming to see my show. They're going to see the new people they haven't seen before. So my goal in Edinburgh is to get the show ready to take it on the road. So Edinburgh for me is a sort of hot housing of the show. But having said that, people are still buying tickets. So I don't want to take it there and it be rubbish. You know, I still want it to be a good show when I get to Edinburgh, but then just get it really fit and ready to take on the road. So I was previewing it a lot beforehand, all over the place in sort of small venues, and then got to Edinburgh, and it happens every single time, and every time I'm surprised by it. You think, right, that's the show I'm going to do, and then you go to Edinburgh and you do it, and jokes that have worked everywhere else in the country don't work in Edinburgh. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So you're like, oh, okay, well that joke I really liked has got to go. And so the first week is sort of working out, okay, well what do these audiences want if they don't want that, you know, and just sort of tweaking bits. But usually it just takes a couple of days and then you're, okay, this is the show now. And then it's just a case of getting it really tight and really just sharp so that when you take it out on tour, it's as tight and as sharp as it can be.
So really, it's I'm thinking from an actor's point of view. Well, it's a script, isn't it? By the end of it, presumably, your show is a real script, is a tight script. Is that right?
Fairly, yeah. I mean, the difference, I guess, is that in a stand-up show, if things happen in the room that you can respond to, that you can't if you're acting in a play. You know, so if somebody coughs or sneezes or drops something or, you know, a mobile phone goes off or whatever, I can react. So I can come off my script very easily. But it's being able to get back on it is the tricky thing. Because also in Edinburgh, you've got your hour slot and somebody else is coming in after you. So, you know, you can't go wandering off what you need to get said too much because you don't have time then to finish your show. So you have to be a bit more disciplined in Edinburgh than you do anywhere else, just because you've got that hour and that's it, and you can't, you know, you haven't got much room to play with. Whereas on tour, you can have it's a bit more relaxed.
Do you have to, because in Edinburgh it's smallish venues, isn't it? But then when you're out on tour, you're in much bigger venues. Do you have to make any kind of adjustments to either the way you put the material across or the material itself because of the size of the room?
Generally, not too much. It's I mean, the rooms I'm playing in Edinburgh now are a bit bigger than they were. So I think the room I had this year was 170 seater, which isn't massive, but it's not, you know, you start off, you're paying sort of 30 seaters or 40 seaters. So I would say that obviously the bigger the room, the less personal it can feel. So if you're on stage at the Hammersmith Apollo, for example, you've got 3,500 people.
Yeah.
You haven't got that connection to everyone in the room that you have in a room of 100 people. You know, you can't see everybody. You can't tell exactly what's going on in the room. And, you know, if somebody drops a mug at the back of Hammersmith Apollo, you're not going to know about it from the stage. So it's a slightly less personal sort of thing. So you react less to things that are happening in the room, the bigger the room is. But having said that, in many ways, the bigger the room is, the easier it is. You know, if you can play a room with 20, 30 people in it, then you can play a room with 10,000 people in it, because, you know, 50% of 20 people laughing is only 10 people. 50% of 3,000 people laughing is still a lot of laughs, you know.
Yeah,
so
of course.
It's that if you can make a small amount of people laugh, then the bigger rooms are easy. And also, like, laughing's there's so many theses to be written about sort of audience behaviours, I think, in comedy or in any sort of performance. But an audience doesn't necessarily know what is affecting them and what is making them behave in the way they do. You're very unaware of it when you're just watching something. You think, well, I'm either finding it funny or I'm not. But if you're in a room where the audience is too lit, they're very aware that they can be seen from the stage, that makes them very tense because they know that you can see them. And so tense people don't laugh, or it takes more to make tense people laugh. Whereas if they're in a big group of people in the dark and they're anonymous, then they behave as a big mass and they can let themselves go. They can be disinhibited. They can, because they know you can't see them. And so that's much easier to make people. So there's all these little things that people in an audience might go, oh, that was a bit awkward, that show. They didn't laugh at anything. Whereas as a performer, you're going, that's because you all had lights on you and you could see, I could see you, and you were all tense and nervous and weren't relaxed. You know, so there's all these sort of little things that make it a different energy in a room or a different sort of way an audience behaves. It's quite interesting.
And how does that work for you, the sort of converse of that? I mean, do you like to be able to see your audience, or are you happy if you know, you look out there and it's dark? What do you prefer?
I prefer if they're in the dark, to be honest. Not because I don't want to see them particularly, but mainly because of what I've just said. I know that if they're in the dark, they're going to be more relaxed and happy, and so I'm more relaxed and happy. If they're very well lit, very often that means I know that they know I can see them, and then it's all tense, and then you have to work harder to break that tension, because that's what a laugh is, a break of tension. You build up the tension and then you break it and they laugh, and it's a relief thing. But if they're aware that you can see them, because laughing is something that we do that, you know, is quite disinhibited. It's quite, we make a noise, we pull a funny face. So if you're aware that people are looking at you laughing, it's very hard to laugh. You want to be doing it in a way that no one can see you, so you can really let yourself go. So I prefer, sometimes if I'm emceeing a gig, if I'm hosting a gig and bringing on other acts, sometimes then I might ask for the lights to go up a little bit, because then I'll talk to the audience. If I'm not doing a set or a show, and I might talk to them a bit more, then I want to see them. Sure. But generally, I think everyone's happier if the audience is in the dark and we're lit.
Sorry, it makes sense. Sorry, Jane, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if heckling still happens, because it used to be a big thing, didn't it? Does that still happen, and is it ever funny when it does?
It's rarely funny when it does. It does happen, not as often as it used to. I think there was a period of time, I think in that sort of early part of the alternative comedy scene, where it was seen like it was a combative sport, that it was audience versus comedian, and that was and that's not what it is now, really. And I think some people, if they don't go to comedy very often, or they don't realise that that's not what it is. And so what often happens now is, because if people have bought a ticket to see you as a comedian, they haven't bought a ticket to hear Dave down the pub who thinks he's funny shout out stupid things, you know? Yeah. And so what tends to happen now is, when that does happen, the audience quite often polices it themselves. They'll tell them to shut up because they are trying to watch a show, you know. It happens more in comedy clubs, I would say, because people, you know, lots of drink. And also what happens in a comedy club is the audience haven't booked to see you specifically. So if I'm doing a tour show, they've booked to see me, so they know what they're getting, they know what they're expecting, and, you know, and generally speaking, they're already going to be, want of a better word, fan, or someone who likes what you do. Whereas in a comedy club, they're just given what they're served up, and you're not everyone's cup of tea, you know. But comedy's subjective. We all agree comedy's subjective, so there's no way you can please everyone as a comedian. So if you've got someone in, but despite the fact we all know that, and you ask anyone, they'll say, yeah, comedy's subjective, different things make people laugh in a different way. People get really angry when you're not their taste. And it's you know, be that on Twitter, be that in a comedy club, whatever. They're like, I don't think this is funny, and it makes them angry that other people are finding it funny and they're not. Rather than just going, oh yeah, comedy's subjective, this isn't my cup of tea, I'll wait for the next act, or I'll go and do something else until they're finished, or whatever. They've got to let you know that you're not their cup of tea, because they think all entertainment should be geared to what they're into, you know. So there's these weird dynamics are at play, and drink comes in. But I find it usually two things happen with a heckler. One is they'll shout out something really stupid, and all you have to do is go, sorry, what did you say? And then the room goes quiet. And when they then have to repeat it in a quiet room, they'll realise how stupid what they said was, and suddenly they look like idiots, and you could just go, okay, can I move on now? You've made your point. Or they will say something that is genuinely funny. And in that case, if that happens, if a heckler heckles something that's genuinely funny and the audience laughs, I think sometimes in a comedian, your sort of gut reaction is to try and best them or try and take them down. But the audience has found them funny. They're on their side at that point. They're laughing. So if you then say something nasty, the audience is going to be, what are you doing? They were funny. You know, you have to sort of read where the audience is on the heckler. So if a heckler says something funny and the audience laughs, you have to let them have it. You have to go, nice one, yeah, let's move on. Rather than try and fight it, because then you look a bit desperate and you look a bit like you're going, shut up, I'm the funny one in here, stop stealing my thunder, you know. And then the audience feels a bit uncomfortable and like, well, you know, because what British audiences don't like arrogance. I think some, you know, if you look at a lot of American comics come on stage and they are very high status, they're very, I'm better than you, I know better than you. British audiences won't have that, you know. And the minute you try and say that you're better than them in some way, or the minute you try and assert some sort of authority that you don't have, then they won't have that. You know, we're much more low status. Because I always say I want my audience to go away from my shows not wishing they were me, being grateful they're not me. I want them to feel better about their lives, not worse, you know. So I'd rather the audience come away having had a good laugh and go, that was funny, I'm glad I'm not her, you know.
So that's interesting, Andrew, because it's sort of going back to when you very first started doing stand-up. Can you remember the very first stand-up gig that you did? I mean, you were in your 30s, I think. Am I right?
I was. Yeah, I was 33 when I started. So, no, older than that, I think 34 maybe.
Do you remember it? I mean, and what I was going to ask, apart from that, was, you know, did it feel like suddenly, yeah, I'm home, I've come home, but also the business of finding a persona as a stand-up comic as well? I mean, did that take a while? I mean, you know, was it, I don't know, self-deprecating comedy initially, or do you know what I mean? It's finding what your persona is, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's different for different people, but I think for most comics, your persona will find you. And I think if you try and start out and say, right, I am going to be this sort of comedian, what happens is you then paint yourself in that corner. And if it turns out you're not very good at being that sort of comedian, then you're screwed. Whereas I think when I started, so I started quite late. Like I said, so my first gig was, I did a stand-up comedy course here in Brighton, where I live. The Comedia Comedy Club in Brighton does a brilliant stand-up comedy course, and lots of comedians you've seen on telly will have done it. And so I did that, and they did like a showcase at the end, but you had to audition for it. So I think there was 25 of us on the course, and 12 of us got to do the show at the end. So I auditioned and I got onto the show at the end. So that was my first gig, if you like. But that was a really friendly, because you just invite all your friends and family, everyone's really supportive. And so you do your first gig at the Comedia Comedy Club in Brighton, and there's 250 supportive people there, and you do your 3 minutes of material and come off going, I think I'm a comedy god. Like, I'm obviously a natural at this. And then you go and do your first proper open spot in a proper comedy club where it's, you know, 10 men and a dog in a room above a pub, and you're like, oh no, I'm not a comedy god. I've actually got to learn how to do this. But I think with the persona thing is really interesting, because I think it was Gary Delaney who, he made a really good point once, that you're either a writer who's had to learn to perform or a performer who's had to learn to write, if you're a stand-up comic. So I think some people come very much from an acting, performing background, and so they can really sell a joke, but that'll only get you so far, and you've got to learn how to write material. Or I think I'm more the other camp, where I could write jokes, but I had to learn how to perform them, or to get comfortable with myself performing them. So and so the persona thing for me was, I'm just going to write whatever I can write, whatever I find funny, and then the persona will find me. And it's weird, that moment when you realise what your persona is, because I didn't really think I had one until people started writing reviews of my comedy, and they would say things like, oh, self-deprecating, world-weary, and you're like, oh, that's what I am, is it? Oh, okay, fine. Now I know what I am. And then you just sort of get more confident in your own persona, what your own voice is. And yeah, but I think there's a danger of, particularly if, like me, you're a big comedy fan, when you start doing stand-up, you want to emulate the people that you like. But you might not be able to do that, you know. So quite often the comedians that I like watching most are nothing like what I do. You know, they're completely different styles to me, because I can't do what they do and they can't do what I do. You know, it's different people have different voices and different strengths, and that's just, you just got to see what yours is.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting what you say, you know, that the style in a way found you because you were good at writing jokes, and then actually, and when I listen to you, you know, you are brilliant because you've got such a strong presence, you're so strong vocally as well, and I just love the way, you know, you totally understand about phrasing jokes. But do you think you did that at the beginning? I mean, has this been a kind of learning curve, a learning journey?
It has definitely been a learning curve. I think what is helpful is, having been a fan of stand-up, you sort of absorb a lot by osmosis, because stand-up, what good stand-up does is it makes you think you're just watching someone monologuing at you, telling you stories, telling you anecdotes. But that's not what they're doing. Everything, you might hear what you think is an anecdote, but that anecdote is broken down into set-up, punchline, all the way through. And it's a particular rhythm. So that's why it's different. So when you hear your mate Dave down the pub telling his story, and you're like looking at your watch going, are you going to get to the end of this? Or because they haven't put in the punchlines on the way, So stand-up has a rhythm. It's like learning a language in a way. And if you've watched a lot of stand-up, a lot of that rhythm just gets into your head naturally, without you really knowing that's what it is. And so when you then start to write your own jokes, you have a bit of a feel for what the rhythm is and what will work and what won't. And then the more you do it, the more. So when you start off, you have a lot of jokes that will fail. Whereas now, when I'm writing new material, I have a much better hit rate. I've got a much better sense of what. Sometimes something you're absolutely convinced is going to work just simply doesn't, and you can't work out why. But a lot of the time, you just sort of go, oh yeah, that'll work, that won't, because that hasn't got the right cadence or the right. There's some sounds are just funnier, some words are just funnier, and you just get to a sense of what that is the more you do it. It's just practice.
And I'm sort of really, one thing that really intrigues me, because you do stand up and you do topical stuff, on things like the news quiz and Mock the Week and so on. Is the writing process for you different depending on whether you're doing topical stuff or a stand-up show that's going to tour for a while?
Yeah, I never really set out to be a topical comedian, but what happened is because I was such a Radio 4 nerd growing up, and I loved the news quiz, was my favourite show. I used to listen to it with my dad, and so I sort of fell into it by accident, really, because I did, in 2011, I won the BBC New Comedy Award. I did an interview with a magazine afterwards, and in it they said, what are your comedy ambitions? And I was like, I'd love to do the news quiz. And it just so happened that Victoria Lloyd, who was producing the news quiz at the time, she read that article, and she contacted me on Facebook and said, would you like to come in and do a day's writing on news quiz? And I couldn't believe my luck, because I was a working class girl. I wasn't one of these people who went to university and thought I did go to university, but I didn't join the Footlights or do any of that stuff that is the way in. And I just didn't think this girl from Maidstone would never get a foot in the door at radio comedy. I didn't know how you did it. There was no pathway. There was no, route that you take. So the fact that they Facebooked me and said, do you want to come in and do a day on it? I was like, this doesn't happen in real life. This is not. So I went in and did that. And I found it really hard because I hadn't been writing topical jokes. That wasn't my thing. I was writing very personal material. But I was like, right, I'm going to need to learn how to do this because I really want to do this. And so I sort of had to teach myself how to do that, really, and by talking to other comedians that did do it. And then eventually they, a few years down the line, they asked me to be a panellist on News Quiz, and then eventually to host a series of it. So so by doing that, I then sort of got a name as a topical comedian, and then got asked to do Mock the Week, and I did Stand Up for the Week on Channel 4 as well. And so it was quite by accident. It was never it was just through my love of News Quiz that I sort of fell into that role. And I find it more stressful writing topical stuff, I think, because I do like doing it, but it's the turnover is so quick, obviously. So for example, we filmed Mock the Week this week on Wednesday, so you're writing the jokes on Tuesday, and they've got to be good enough to go on telly the next day. So that's quite a pressure. And we also, for something like Mock the Week, which is a half-hour show, we film for 3 hours. And we cover so many stories that don't make the edit, because you have to make sure you've got enough in the bank, because the news changes so quickly now. So, even if we record on Wednesday and it goes out on Friday, we might have done material about a joke on Wednesday that by Friday is just completely out of date. No one can even remember what the story was, So it's an exercise in writing a lot of jokes for the bin, doing topical comedy. You write a lot of jokes that will never see the light of day because that moment's gone. And those jokes aren't relevant anymore. So it can feel very quite dispiriting when you write a really good joke that no one's ever going to hear, but that's just how it is with topical comedy. So it's a different discipline in that way, and also it's because you just don't have the time to hone anything. So like personal material about anything else I'm doing in a show, you've got time to hone it and tweak it and reword it. And when you're writing it the day before and doing it the next day, it either works or it doesn't. You haven't got time to go, oh, if I change that word, then that might work. You know, you haven't got that time. So it can be a bit dispiriting.
So do you ever get, for something like Mock the Week, you know you've got to get the stuff out there, do you ever get sort of joke blindness, you know, joke blankness? You think, oh my God, does your head think, oh God, I can't think today. I can't think do you
all the time? And I have to just what I've learned about myself is that sitting at a blank screen or blank notebook, that's not gonna make it come, you know. So I'll have to go and walk the dog or walk around the block or go for a swim or do something else so that part of my brain can kick back in, because it's not going to kick back in while I'm sitting stressing about it. Because the more you stress that you're not writing, the less likely you're going to get in a frame of mind where you can write, you know. So sometimes, and that's a really hard thing to do when you've got a limited amount of time. It's a hard thing to learn, that sometimes the best use of that time isn't sitting writing, it is to go and do something else and come back to it, and you'll actually be more productive than if you sat at a screen for 8 hours. And that was a lesson that took me a long time to learn. And sometimes you just look at a story and you can't see the wood for the trees, you can't see the funny in it, you know, and it's just not gripping you. And so that's when I might talk to someone else and go, I can't find anything funny in this, and they'll be like, well, what about that angle, or what about that angle? Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, come at it from that angle. So it's and the other thing as well you have now, with particularly with topical comedy, is all the first jokes you think of are going to have been on Twitter within 30 seconds of the story breaking. You know, all the obvious jokes are out there already, and sometimes you just have to go, well, I'm just going to have to make the same joke that everyone else has thought of, because there's nothing else to be had on this story. Or you have to sort of work through those. You go, right, get all the obvious jokes out of my head, right, bin them, now let's see if I can find something not as obvious, come at it from a different angle, you know. And there's different ways you could do that. I had a really good bit of advice once that I've used ever since from Jason Manford. Gave me this advice with writing stand-up, about having I've got a post-it note above my desk with a list of all the school subjects on, so maths, English, history, science, whatever. And so when I'm writing about something, I look at that, because that helps me think about it in a different way. So you go, well, have you thought about the historical perspective of this? Have you thought about the, you know, how this might be in different countries? Have you thought about, you know, and it's just a way of looking at something through different lenses. I know some people use, like, the categories in Trivial Pursuit is another way to do it. To go, right, have I thought about this from a science point of view? Have I thought about it from a nature point of view? Have I thought about it from, you know, just to make you look at it from different angles, to try and think about things in a way no one else has.
Yes, sort of refire your imagination, looking at it, different ways. So and what's interesting, because you're so dynamic and you do so much, Angela, and you're a fantastic role model in many ways. But what I'm interested in, what were you doing with this energy before you became a stand-up, before you entered the world of comedy? Where did you put this energy?
I think, well, it's pretty tragic, really. I think I put it into being sad a lot of the time, which is really, I was kind of, I say this sort of sounds glib, but comedy really saved me in a lot of ways, because I was, in my 20s, I wasn't a happy person, really. And I've since been diagnosed with ADHD. Last year I got diagnosed with ADHD. And I know it feels like everyone is being diagnosed with ADHD at the moment, but I think there's a reason for that, and that is that people are understanding it more, and it does affect a big percentage of people being neurodivergent, and particularly comedians. And I think there's no surprise that a lot of us are currently being diagnosed with ADHD, because there's a reason we do this job and not other jobs. You know, the amount of times in my life people have said, oh, I couldn't do your job, and I think, well, you work in an office 9 to 5, I couldn't do yours. You know, or it's horses for courses, and there's a reason we're attracted to this job, a job that you know, 'cause people say I couldn't do it, the public speaking element of it, all of that. But I'm actually quite, one-on-one, I'm quite a socially awkward person. You know, at a party or anything like that, I can be very socially awkward and very withdrawn. Whereas on a stage, all those social anxieties aren't there, because I know it's always my turn to speak. I know I'm not talking over anyone. I know I'm not going, oh God, have I not let them say what they need to say? Have I trodden on, you know, am I being weird? Am I being this? Am I being that? All those anxieties are gone. On a stage, it's just me, and I don't even have to give them eye contact, and I can just speak and be free. And that's why for someone like me who's got ADHD and these other issues, that is a more comfortable place to be than to be at a dinner party, for example, or to be in a room full of people I don't know very well, trying not to say anything stupid. So, and also it's having that control over, I've always been clumsy and awkward and a bit weird. In stand-up comedy, I can own that. I can say the things before anyone else can. I can say the horrible things about myself. I can acknowledge that, yes, I know, I'm do this, that, and the other. Aren't I an idiot? You know, I can acknowledge all of that. So I'm not feeling worried about it or anxious about it. So I think that energy I had went into really negative things beforehand, because I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy in the jobs I was doing. I wasn't happy in the life I had. And then I found this life that suits me so brilliantly, because no 2 days are the same. And I'm not going to the same place every day with the same people, eating the same lunch. You know, I'm getting that dopamine hit that it turns out I need to survive. I'm getting it from a million different places every day. So, yeah, it's been, it sounds really corny to say it, but it's been properly life-changing. Finding this job. Yeah.
It doesn't sound, I think it's amazing actually, and it's like a salvation. So it must have felt when you did that first gig and you started to get response like you were home, like you something. Yeah. This is it. Do you regret not doing it sooner, Angela?
I often do, because regret's not the right word, because I think sometimes when I think of who I was when I was in my 20s, I didn't have the confidence. And I would never have done it. And I didn't have the life experience either. There's something about having had proper jobs, had a bit of a life before you start writing that gives you something to draw on. You know, if I'd come straight out of university into stand-up comedy, what have I got that's relatable? You know, because if your whole life has been travelling to gigs, then, well, the audience can't relate to that. Whereas I've got a life that I can draw from that they can relate to. The thing that frustrates me about it, particularly as a woman, unfortunately, is that because I started a bit later, you know, women approaching 50 aren't attractive to TV producers, unfortunately, still. And that's the frustrating thing, is that, you know, I get turned down for things because I'm too old. And you're just like, if I started at 25 instead of 35, then maybe I'd still be able in with a shout for these things. It's changing. It is changing. And it's certainly better than it was, I think, even 10 years ago. But you still know that in a TV producer's head, as a woman, I'm past it. I'm getting past it for certain things.
That is
so
outrageous.
shocking.
That is
so
outrageous.
shocking that that's still happening.
It really is.
Yeah. And it's not for men, you know.
Oh,
no,
God, no.
It's so wrong.
No.
And actually, you know, what is so frustrating as well, because you are somebody who is actually ageless to me. I don't look at. No, but it's true. But it's true. But it's true. You know, some people you think, oh yeah, you know, you put them in some category, but actually you have an energy about you which is ageless, and that really upsets me that actually if that's happened, because you're just brilliant, because you're so dynamic, you're so full of energy, and it's what we need. I mean, of course, female newscasters say the same thing, don't they? You know, or you know, and that saddens me, like Janie says, to think that that's still going on. That's absolute rubbish. It's really awful.
It's just shocking. You think we sort of got past that, don't you? And you know, you look at the days when you were only allowed to have one woman on a panel show. You know, like if you were on Mock the Week, then there weren't allowed to be any other women on it, because you'd got the woman, and you sort of hope that these things have gone and changed. But absolutely shocking now if you're only allowed, you know, to have young women on.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So the whole only one woman thing, I think it just took people a long time to realise that female wasn't a genre of comedy. You know, that actually we're not all the same, and we don't all talk about this. And people have got this sort of collective idea that we all talk about periods and that's all we talk about. And I don't know any comics that do, really, or not many. And also, do you think if men had periods, they wouldn't talk about it?
Oh my God, it's all they talk about.
We are 51% of the population. Why shouldn't we talk about the things that affect our lives? And that's why I won't shy away from. So a lot of people have said to me when I was starting out, said, stop talking about how old you are because you look younger than you are. And I was like, I'm not going to stop talking about how old I am, because this is my frame of reference. If you know, if I'm 35 and people think I'm 28, well, they're soon going to find out I'm not when I'm talking about things from my life. You know, why would I get myself in a situation where I have to think what I'm supposed to talk about? Or and like now, for example, so I've just started taking HRT and I'm perimenopausal and all that stuff's happening. Hey, it's brilliant, isn't it? But you know, I'm not going to not talk about that in my stand-up just because because people are frightened about middle-aged women. You know, that's their problem. I can't take that responsibility, because I write about my life, and that's what's happening in my life. And my responsibility, I care much more about the middle-aged women that are coming to my shows that want to see themselves reflected, because they're certainly not seeing themselves on telly.
God, no.
I want them to see me, you know, that rather than worrying about what, let's face it, young men or younger people than me that are the gatekeepers with TV, you know, are worried about. I always say, like, when you get to a certain age as a woman, it's like people go, well, you don't have kids and you're going through the menopause, so what is your purpose? Why are you here? You know, so you're like a waiter at Nando's. What are you for? Like, why does the world need you? You know, and I just think there's so many women out there that are in exactly that situation that aren't represented anywhere. You know, and that's why I talk a lot about being voluntarily childless as well. That's a really important thing to me, because in everything, and actually the Archers has been guilty of this recently. I got a bit cross about it because you know, there's a storyline with Fallon doesn't want children but Harrison does, and every single time there is anyone in a drama that wants children, their partner doesn't. That doesn't want children, their partner does. And I can't think of a single place in any soap opera where there's been a happy married couple who happily have chosen not to have children and have a lovely life and are very pleased with that decision and don't regret it at all. And there's loads of us. There's loads of us that have made that decision, particularly now more than ever. Yet, no, you know, you're not allowed to be that. So those things are really important to me, that, you know, people that aren't represented on TV or aren't represented in the, well, I'm not going to pretend to not be that person to please, you know, TV producers or whatever. And that's also the nice thing about things like this, like podcasts. There's a democratization now of entertainment, which is long overdue, that if you have got something you want to make creatively, you can make it. And there aren't gatekeepers. And, you know, there's people now that are playing live at the Apollo that did it through doing YouTube, or did it through putting their own stuff out there in their own way. And that is glorious, I think.
Yeah, us too. I mean, the reason that we started this really was because we're both getting towards 70 and we're nowhere, you know. We just don't exist at all. We're just battling grannies or old age pensioners.
Well, that's it. That's how you're seen, as if you're either some sort of miserable old battle axe, or you're not allowed to be approaching 70 and be sexy and happy and have a healthy, happy relationship. And, you know, God forbid. And what is even more frustrating about that is that's exactly the demographic of people that still watch terrestrial television.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
It's not 20-year-olds aren't watching it. So why are you making so much content for them when it's my mum who sits at home on a Saturday night watching telly? You know, why is she not getting represented anywhere? Why? It's so frustrating. And then, of course, you moan about it, and then you're sour grapes because you're not on telly. Do you know what I mean? So you just go, well, what can you do? Until the people who are on telly go, hey, guys, wouldn't it be nice if we had some other people represented here? That's what needs to happen. And that's what started happening, like with there being not enough women on panel shows and things like that, is it took the guys on the panel shows to go, do you know there's some really good female comics that could be on here as well? Because while we go, why aren't we on the shows? It looks like people are going, well, maybe you're not good enough, so shut up. You know, it takes the people who are there to not pull up the ladder behind them and to welcome people in, really.
Well, and, you know, somebody's doing a wonderful job of that.
Thank you.
And you're talking TV, I have to mention Richard Osman's House of Games, because I think you were the first person to win all 5 days, weren't you?
Still at the moment, still the only person, I think.
Are you?
Yeah. It's Friday today, and there's someone on 4. So, well, I mean, the competition wasn't up to much on the. That's not fair. Do you know, we had such a lovely day filming that week, the original one I did. It was so much fun. I loved doing that show. And I just sort of, word games and crosswords and things like that are just my thing. And, you know, a lot of people gave me stick for it, but I'm just like, well, you wouldn't have given me stick if I'd been good at football, or if I'd been good at, you know, let me have the thing I'm good at. And it just happens to be silly word games on telly. I've just realised I've got my Richard Osman right behind me there, my Richard Osman Russian dolls. I don't know if you can see them.
Yes.
I've got all my prizes.
What prizes you had?
I've got the Russian dolls. I got the wheelie case.
Oh, that's the top one.
That's the top one. I love my wheelie case. I did get the dartboard, but I gave that to Denise Van Outen because her daughter wanted one, so I gave that to her. I can't remember because I've done 2. Because I did a Champion of Champions one as well.
Oh, that's right. Of course you did.
So and I won 4 of the 5 on that. So I've got quite a lot of Richard Osman's face around the house.
That's amazing. But you're so fast. That's the thing. You're so you're not just bright. A lot of people are bright, but you're bright and very, very quick with it as well.
Well, I guess you need that, don't you, to be stand-up as well? You need to. Your brain needs to work quite rapidly, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's why comedians do well on House of Games. I think because we're word people and we're used to having to think quickly, think on your feet. So I think that's why comedians do tend to do quite well on it.
Yeah.
So when you were a little girl, sorry, I keep harping back because I'm interested. So were you a jokes girl? I mean, did you write lots of jokes when you were little, or were you a great storyteller when you were little? Where does the word thing fit in when you were young?
I think I was a storyteller. I can remember at school I always used to get good marks for my stories that I would write, and I would always try and make them funny. And my dad was a proper sort of raconteur type, he loved telling stories. He loved having the attention of the room and, telling these anecdotes that, we'd all heard 100 times before, would roll our eyes, go, oh God, he's off again, but people were, and so I think it was from him. Both my mum and dad loved comedy and loved watching comedy and would take me to live comedy. When I was 14, my mum took me to see Victoria Wood live. My dad and mum both loved Monty Python, and so it was always there, comedy and laughing in our family. My mum is one of 9 brothers and sisters, and so I've got lots of cousins, lots of family, and we get together, and that's the currency in our family, is making each other laugh, and it's always been that, and so it very much part of growing up, I think. So I didn't specifically write jokes, but I was aware of the nice feeling of when someone laughs at what you say.
Yeah. It's so interesting because what we become eventually. You can see the seeds of it early on, even if it's not a straight journey through there. You look back and think, oh yeah, that's where that was, and that's how it's come out now. Yeah,
definitely. Because I think when I was at school, so I'm quite shy. I was never sort of. I always had friends, and I was always I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't one of the cool kids. I wasn't one of the I went to a girls' grammar school because I grew up in Kent where they still have the 11 plus and stuff. So I wasn't one of the pretty girls that or one of the cool girls. I was sort of in the middle somewhere, just getting on with it, quite academically bright, but also was able to make people laugh, I guess. But I wasn't a performer. Really, and so I think a lot of people that knew me when I was younger sort of find out what I do now and go, what, that girl? That one? Are you sure that one is doing it? And same in my family, really. There's a lot more extrovert people in my family than I am. A lot more lots of musicians in my family, lots of singers, and when growing up, it was all funny and it was always chaos, but I was an observer of it a lot more than I was a participant. But I think that all goes in, you sort of absorb it all. And then go, oh, okay, I see what's going on here, and then sort of work your own way out how to do it.
When you were at school, thinking of school, were you, because you're such a history buff, I mean, the We're History podcast, I think, I've enjoying that so much over the years.
Thank you.
Well, because I know everything about the Tudors, because that's what we seem to do that year after year at school, and quite a bit about ancient Egypt, and nothing about modern history, even though I lived through quite a lot of it. So it's just been brilliant to catch up on all this stuff that I knew nothing about. And were you interested in history at school?
Not at all, no. And I think for that reason is it didn't grab me at school at all. I wasn't interested, still not interested really in kings and queens and the sort of history of like rich people, basically. I was more interested in social history. I was more interested in everyday lives and so it never grabbed me. So I didn't do GCSE in history. I didn't do an A-level in history or anything like that. And it wasn't until I was a bit older, really, and started reading a bit more independently about things. So for me, like Cold War history is my thing. And I do the podcast with John O'Farrell, who you met, like a brilliant comedy writer. He was one of the original head writers on Spitting Image and a very funny man. And also... he wrote some sort of funny history books as well. He's a novelist. He writes musicals. He's a proper sort of, great writer. And I approached him because I'd read his history books and loved the sort of tone of them, and knew I wanted to do a podcast in that sort of tone where, you know, people can learn, but it's not dry, but you know, we have a bit of a laugh and a bit of a exactly. And luckily for me, he was up for it, so we started doing it. And it's funny, so he has to remind me that our podcast isn't just about the 20th century. You know, he has to go like, let's do an episode about the Black Death, or let's do an episode about something else. You know, oh yeah, all right then, fine, yeah. But I just find, sort of more modern history fascinating, particularly stuff I've lived through, particularly Cold War stuff, you know, where I was, the Berlin Wall came down on my 13th birthday. So I remember it being on the news. I remember all that, you know, to learn what actually happened and to, I just find it really fascinating. And there's a dream I have where I sort of go off and do a degree in modern history, and then just for fun. But unfortunately, I can't afford to not work for 3 years to do that. So maybe one day, maybe that's my retirement plan.
Yeah, and why not? Why not?
Yeah.
How long does it take you to? 'Cause it sounds from the podcast like you take it in turns to lead on a particular episode. How long does it take you to research it? Because you seem to have done a huge amount of reading, a huge amount of research on it.
A lot is the answer to that. That's why we do sort of short series, and then we have quite a long break between them, because it's a passion project for John and I. We really love doing it, but it takes a lot of time because you have to read the books, then digest them, and then sort of regurgitate them in a funny way. So it is a lot of prep for something that makes you no money. So that's why we didn't ever want to get ourselves in a position where it was something we dreaded having to do. So we just make them when we've got the time and we've got the energy, really. And that's why we haven't done one for a few months, because, well, John's just had a musical open on Broadway, which is a pretty good excuse. And, you know, I had Edinburgh and things like that. So,
Edinburgh.
Yeah, so we've had a little pause, but we are coming back. And, so it's a lot of work, but it's, I really love doing it. And, and audiences seem to like it. You know, it's steadily growing in listeners and stuff. So hopefully we can keep doing it.
Oh, it is. I mean, I really enjoy it too. And I was listening to the Profumo one last night, actually. And I get really reeled in. And I mean, that is some history that I do know something about. But it's the interaction between you. It's like I'm sitting there having a cup of tea, watching you both. You know, I'm in the lounge with you. And it's just lovely. You're just feeding in different information. And it's... But like Janie, that was the question I was going to ask. My goodness, these people have done a huge amount of research on this.
We do a lot. I mean, what we tend to do is we'll record a couple of episodes at a time. So John will do all the research on one and then send me the notes, and I'll do all the research on the other and send him the notes. And, you know, we also do a bit more of reading of each other's, so we're not just like having to wing it. But what's really nice is because John and I didn't know each other before so the history of the podcast is that I think it was in 2014. He came to my, he just happened to come to my Edinburgh show. I'd never met him, but he came to my Edinburgh show and he tweeted afterwards to say that he'd been to my show and really enjoyed it. And so I followed him on Twitter and I'd read his books and stuff. And then skip forward a few years, I had this idea that I wanted to do a history podcast and I wanted to do it with someone. And like I said, I'd read his books, knew I really liked the tone of them, and I thought he'd be great, but he's probably a very busy man. He's not going to want to. And so I sent him a message just on Twitter and said, look, I've had this idea for a podcast I really want to do. I don't know how much time you've got, whether you'd be up for it. And apparently he asked his daughter, Lily, who's sort of in her 20s, and said, you know, is this something I should do? And she said, yes, this is something you should do. Right. And that was that. And so we made a couple. We just sort of, you know, didn't really know. And we've become really good friends. It's so lovely because it just worked. The dynamic just seems to work. And we both love our dogs and we both love beer. And so it always comes round to dogs and beer at some point. But there's a nice little bit of, you know, I sort of take the mickey out of him for being a posh old white bloke, you know, and he takes the mickey out of me for being common or whatever. You know, we just have this, it's a really nice little energy. And that's what people say quite often. It's just like listening to a couple of people down the pub talking about history rather than it being a lesson.
It's really, really lovely.
Yeah, no, it works terribly well.
Thank you.
And I mean, really what comes over very, very strongly is that you are an absolute connoisseur of nuclear bunkers.
Yes, so that is my... I mean, all the episodes would be about Cold War and nuclear bunkers if I could have it my way. Yeah, I mean, that came about in a really strange way. So I like I said, I sort of just, as an adult, started reading more about history and particularly that... I think it all started... I had a little bit of an obsession with this East German history, communist East Germany, because of the Berlin Wall coming down on my birthday and it being such a big thing. And I was learning German at school at the time, and so our teacher obviously was very invested in what was happening in her home country. She was German, and telling us all about it. And the fact that this was going on so geographically close to where we were was something that always fascinated me, you know, that this and sort of German history in the 20th century fascinates me because so many regime changes in such a quick period of time. That fascinates me. So I started sort of reading more and more about it, and then I read a book that was talking about sort of preparations for nuclear war in the Cold War, and I was living in Crystal Palace at the time in South London, and they were talking about these bunkers that had been built, these Royal Observer Corps bunkers and also government bunkers, and it turned out there was one at the bottom of a block of flats in Crystal Palace. So I was like reading this book going, no, there I walk past that block of flats every day. There's not a nuclear bunker there. So I walked up there, and sure enough, they're in the basement. It's all locked up and you can't get in, but there's a sort of reinforced concrete nuclear bunker. I was like, I need to find out more about these places. So then I just started learning more, and then I learned about the Royal Observer Corps, who were they'd been the people who in World War I had been plane spotters, but then they were sort of designated in the Cold War to be the people who, if there'd been a nuclear fallout, nuclear bomb, they would map the fallout and when it was dangerous to be outside and things like that. And they have 1,500 bunkers built all over the British countryside. So I started finding them, like going out and finding them, and going, and some people are, some of them are privately owned, some of them are opened as museums now and things like that. And I just got obsessed with the whole Royal Observer Corps and what they did, and actually I've got really involved with one in Dundee. There's one, and a Royal Observer Corps headquarters bunker. It's a big bunker. So I had my hen do in there last year. So me and 12 friends went up to a nuclear bunker. We slept in the dormitories and we had a great time. So that is my weird obsession.
Not a bad time to know about nuclear bunkers.
Well, no, that's it. People aren't laughing now at my obsession. No. I'll tell you that.
There is one thing I need to ask you about, just because I heard you talk about this a month or so ago. I was at Sonny's and we were having dinner, weren't we? And you pulled out a bottle of salad cream. We had a very long discussion about salad cream. and then I read that you were, or heard you talking about how salad cream, next to nuclear bunkers, salad cream was one of your major obsessions in life. So we have to ask you to share some salad cream recipes.
I love salad cream. Honestly, if they stopped making salad cream, I'd be devastated. I'm a working class girl. What can I say? I like salad cream. And one of my favourite things is, everyone just thinks this is disgusting, but my comfort food is, and it's something I used to eat when I was little. I don't know how it ever came about, but I will have just a bowl of peas with salad cream. Just mix peas in salad cream. Oh my God,
I can see
delicious.
that.
When I was a student, I used to eat salad cream sandwiches. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I like salad cream. I prefer salad cream to mayonnaise, because this is what we were talking about, weren't we, Jamie?
Yeah.
But I can remember years ago, I don't know if you've been to Holland, but going to Holland, and you can buy chips and salad cream. That's what they have, sort of these little shops on the roadside. And I was in seventh heaven. So if you go to Holland, look for that, because they're into salad cream.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
Yeah, a little tip there.
I don't mind mayonnaise, but salad cream, it's got to be, salad. Yeah. If I had to choose.
Yeah.
Salad cream would win.
I'm with you there, I'm afraid. I'm with you. Salad cream and a bit of lettuce. Oh, that's the thing for me.
But it just makes salad palatable, you know. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's got a bit of a kick. Mayonnaise is just a bit boring, I find. You know.
Yeah, I agree.
Now the other thing is, of course, that I read just last night actually, that you're also a figure skater.
That is pushing it.
Didn't you used to do that? Yeah,
I did when I was little. For my 9th birthday, I grew up when Torvill and Dean were winning Olympic medals, you know, and it was all very in the 80s. And for my 9th birthday, my auntie bought me 6 figure skating lessons, and I went along and I absolutely loved it. And I did it until I was about 14. So I got to, I've got grade 9 in figure and free skating. But I mean, I couldn't do any of the things I used to be able to do now, but I used to do little Christmas shows at it was the Ice Bowl in Gillingham in Kent, and I used to do the Christmas shows there, and I absolutely loved it. But I'll tell you this now, because I didn't get, but the year before last, I auditioned for Dancing on Ice.
Did you?
Well, I was going to ask you that. Oh.
Yeah, and so I went along to the audition and I got to skate with Karen Barber, who's their sort of head trainer, but I also I knew who she was, obviously from the 80s, and so I was really excited and I skated with, and loads of it came back. It was really because I hadn't put on a pair of skates for years. And so I got on the ice and I was a bit wobbly at first, and then I was like, oh, hang on, no, I can skate, I remember, and it all just sort of started coming back, and I really loved it. But unfortunately they didn't choose me, so what can you do?
Idiots.
maybe another year they will, because I would love to do it and properly go and learn how to do it again. Unfortunately there's not an ice rink near where I live, because I thought, oh, maybe I'll just go and learn again anyway, maybe I'll go and have some lessons. But I did, in the pandemic, I'm such a cliche, but I did buy roller skates in the pandemic. And where I live in Brighton, there's a big park that's got an old Victorian velodrome in it, an outdoor velodrome.
I know it.
So I do, in the summer, I take my roller skates and skate around the velodrome. So, yeah.
But you said earlier that you were clumsy, but you can't be clumsy if you can balance on skates. Both Sonny and I have got terrible balance. It's all we can do to stand up on 2 feet.
Yeah.
Well, I've got dyspraxia, but on wheels and on skates, that seems to not... And it was like when I was little, because I remember my dad go, when I wanted to do figure skating, he was like, I don't think that's a good idea. I once ended up in A&E with concussion because I walked through a door and missed. That's how clumsy I was. So my dad, who obviously had these visions of, oh my God, she's going to do herself some real damage. But I did it. For some reason, on the ice or on wheels, suddenly I can be graceful. But as soon as I'm on my own big flat feet, that all goes out the window. So yeah, I think I'd be terrible on Strictly.
Oh God, Sonny, perhaps we should take her ice skating and see if that...
Maybe we'd be okay. Maybe we'd stand upright. Maybe we would. I did try it years ago in Altrincham ice rink when I was about 9 or 10. Hopeless. I couldn't even get onto the ice rink. I mean, I got the skates on and I wet myself because I was laughing so much. I couldn't get from the actual changing room onto the ice rink. I mean, it was hysterical. So there's no hope for me. There's no hope for me, I tell you. Oh God.
Me neither. I remember toddling around the ice rink in Birmingham when I grew up, hanging onto the rail and then getting stranded with the gap and just being completely unable to move. So
I remember my dad being like that. I remember making my dad put some skates on. We'd go, come and have a go, and he just clinging onto the side and then just couldn't bend anything. Like his legs were just straight, and he's like, bend your knees. I can't.
It is really, if you are hopeless, it is completely incapacitating. I mean, it's just sort of, you're stuck there, Oh, so well done, Angela. I mean, it's brilliant, that you did all that. And grade 9, hey, that is brilliant. But one more thing, I'm jumping about here, but of course you've got your lovely Tina, haven't you, your little cockapoo?
I have my little Tina.
Is she a joy?
She is. I absolutely, so she's nearly 14. She's our little cockapoo. And when we got her, my husband was very ambivalent about getting a dog. He was sort of, and I was like, look, I don't want kids, but a dog is a deal breaker. I've wanted a dog my whole adult life, but my life, jobs, whatever, just haven't been that would be possible. And it was 2019. And I had a little chunk of time where I wasn't very busy with work, or I was writing something, so I was at home. And I thought, if we're going to get a dog, we do it now because I've got time to train her and, and so, and also I'm quite severely allergic to a lot of dogs, which is why I've got a poodle cross breed, because you're less likely to be allergic to them. And so her mum was a cockapoo, dad was a poodle, so she's mostly poodle. And my husband, it was so funny because he was like, okay, well, I know that's what you want. And he is an animal lover. He's just never had pets of his own. So it's not really something he'd thought about. And he said, well, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to be responsible dog. I will do that. I will help. I will take her for walks. I will do all of this. And what he didn't expect is that he would fall head over heels in love with her. And from the moment we went to visit her when she was a puppy, she played such a blinder because she'd just sort of woken up. We went round there. She was sort of 6 weeks old. And we picked her up, and she was the little runt of the litter. She was the last one left that no one wanted. So I was like, well, then we're having her. And he picked her up, and it was in January. He had a big winter coat on, and she just sort of stuck her head in his coat like that. and he just melted completely. And honestly, she has him wrapped around her little paw. I tell you, the times I come, she does this thing. We sat on the sofa watching telly, and I'll suddenly turn round and he'll be on the floor and she'll be in his seat. I was like, how does that happen? And he'll go, I don't know. And what she does, she gets a toy, like pretends she wants to play with him. So he'll get off the sofa and play with her, and she jumps in his seat and he just stays on the floor. Like, he doesn't even realise she's done it to him. It's so she really does rule the house. And we said, you know, oh, she's not our baby. We're not going to be those sorts of dog owners, you know, where we're mummy and daddy. And but we totally are. Like, she's brought out something in us we didn't know was there.
Oh, they do. Listen, during lockdown, we got 2 little Jack Russell Terriers from the Dogs Trust because we had to put our cat to sleep. And, you know, I wasn't sure about these 2. I thought, oh, God, no more dogs. We've had dogs before. But actually, they worm their way into your heart. Did 3 years later. And the little one, they're brother and sister, but the little one is got sort of full of allergies and all, and she's not terribly well a lot of the time. And the other week, she actually collapsed in the garden. And I thought, oh, my goodness, she's died. She hadn't, actually. It was lack of oxygen zone, and I got her to the vets. But my heart just was in my mouth, and I belted down that garden at the rate of knots, you know, and I thought, this dog has now wormed away completely into my heart. And they do, don't they? I mean,
they do, because they're so loving, and they're so giving, and they're so trusting, and you feel so responsible because, you know, I love my little Tina, but she would not survive in the wild. She's not the brightest thing, you know. And she has quite bad food allergies, so she can't eat meat, my dog. Oh, bless. So I know, a vegetarian dog who lives in Brighton. Who would have thought it? But that's what she is. And so, you know, you just think, oh, you're so useless in many ways, because she was the little runt of the litter, and so you feel so responsible for her. But they give you so much. It's so much love and so much. And I can't imagine life without her. She's part of the family, and she absolutely has us. She's in charge for sure. But
does she ever come with you to gigs?
She does.
Did she ever come with you to gigs, Angela? Yeah.
Yeah, she does. Before the pandemic, I did a tour in 2019, and she came on tour with me. She was brilliant. But now my husband, since the pandemic, so my husband works in IT and he works from home now, so she tends to it's just easier for her to stay at home. But yeah, when he was in the office every day, she used to come with me to gigs, and she was great. She loved it. They're just such good company. They're so, you know, she's brilliant. I love her. Yeah. And she really got us through the pandemic, you know, because it makes you have to go out and walk them. You can't, you know, if you're feeling a bit low or you're feeling a bit, well, she's like, well, I don't care how you feel. You've got to take me to the park. Come on. You know, it's really good for your mental health, that, I think. They're brilliant.
Absolutely. I mean, how did you cope with lockdown? Was it a nightmare for you?
Do you know, I feel bad because it wasn't really. We were all right. I think for a lot of comedians it was really hard because obviously, I mean, I lost a lot of work. A lot of work just disappeared. But I am lucky in that my husband had a full-time job working in IT that he could continue to do from home. So we had his salary coming in, which covers our mortgage. And, you know, so we weren't worried about money in that way that a lot of people were. And I did get little outlets, you know, I hosted a series of news quiz from home. I did bits and bobs online and, you know, and I was also writing stuff at the time. So I was fine, really. I did miss, you know, seeing people. I missed seeing my comedian friends and doing my job, and but compared to how a lot of people had it, we were all right. We're very lucky where we live. We're surrounded, you know, I'm in Brighton. It's a nice place. If you're going to be locked down by the sea and surrounded by nice parks, you know. So yeah, we were lucky, really. And I just in some ways, even I think just before the lockdown, I'd burnt out without really realizing I'd burnt out. You know what it's like when you're self-employed, and I think particularly if you come from a sort of working class background, it's very hard to take a break. Yeah, it's very hard to turn things down and go, actually, no, I need time not working, because you're always worried that if I say no, they won't ask me again. Yeah, you know, and you end up in a situation where you haven't taken a break, you haven't stopped really. And I'd got to that point without realising it. So when the lockdown came and it was this enforced break, I think I actually needed it. You know, for me, I think it was a good thing that it made me sort of reevaluate a few things and go, okay, well, you know, you're surviving you and your husband are surviving without your income, so maybe you don't need to say yes to everything. maybe you can start saying yes to the things that you want to do, rather than you know, this panic that everything's going to dry up and disisappear. So
I think that's really
psychologically
interesting.
it's good.
Yeah, I think it was, you know, for a lot of people as well, and maybe a lot of us freelancers, you know, whatever. The same thing happened to me. I just realised I was going at life at 100 miles an hour. There was no time to stop. There was no time to think. And suddenly that enforced stoppage, as it were, you suddenly thought, hang on, there is time here. There is time, and I don't have to hurtle around like this. And it did make me reassess, like you know, coming back afterwards and thinking, I need just to take time. Actually, take time. I don't have to go at this at 100 miles an hour, because I don't think as human beings we're really yet programmed for all that, and I think we can do ourselves a lot of damage if we're not careful.
Absolutely. And you're supposed to, you know, I think particularly as a woman, you're supposed to be able to do it all, aren't you? You're supposed to be able to do it all.
Absolutely.
And without and sometimes you just can't. And one of the best thing I did during that first lockdown was I bought a sewing machine. And I'd never ever used a sewing machine before. And I bought a sewing machine, and I've got a friend, Emma, who's one of these very crafty people. And she, bless her, it was so lovely. On a Wednesday evening, me and another friend, Kirsten, we'd do a Zoom with Emma every Wednesday evening with a bottle of wine and get on Zoom. And she taught us how to crochet first. So she'd have a camera on her hands and then a camera on her face. And we learnt to crochet during that first lockdown. And now, I mean, I crochet all the time now. I find when I'm watching telly, whatever, so she's given me this skill I would never have had time to learn. And then, so we did that first. And then I was like, well, I can do that. I'm going to buy a sewing machine. Because I just always assumed, because I'm a bit dyspraxic and a bit clumsy or whatever, that anything like that I wouldn't be able to do. And in 2020, I made loads of my own clothes. And they weren't perfect. They were full of mistakes or whatever. But it felt like such an achievement and a thing that I was doing purely for me. And I really learned a lesson in that I could be a bit of a perfectionist sometimes. You go, and I think my whole life I've gone, well, what's the point in doing something if I can't be the best at it, or one of the best at it, or, you know, if I can't. And actually learning, and that's why I was never good at art or drawing. You know, I had teachers used to laugh at my artwork when I was at school. It was so bad. So I just assumed, well, I'm not good at that stuff, so don't do it. Whereas I suddenly learned it's not about the end result, it's about the process. And if you enjoy the process of doing something, then do it. You know, it doesn't matter. And so that, like, Christmas 2020, my poor family were getting all these awful handmade crochet dolls and all sorts. But I was like, I don't care if you like them or not. I made them with love, and that's all that counts.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Hey, but Angela, you could go on the Great Sewing Bee. You could go on the Great Sewing Bee now, couldn't you? Hey,
I'd love to.
Celebrity there.
I would love to. Yeah, I would really love to do that. I mean, the problem, this is my new dream, is we live in a flat, and hopefully we'll be buying a house soon. We'll wait and see what happens. Things are a bit up in the air at the minute, but I just want a spare room where I can have my sewing machine set up all the time, so that I could just go in and do a bit. Because the problem is, at the moment, I've got it all put away, and it's such a ordeal to get it all out and do something, then put it all away again. And when you're just snatching bits of time when you're busy, you just think, oh, I can't be bothered to get it all out. So I just want a room where it's set up all the time, so when I've got a spare half an hour, I can go and do a little bit, and then start to make more stuff and learn more.
Now, Angela, one of the things that we always ask our lovely guests is, what would you say to your younger self?
Ooh, well, gosh, so much. But I think one of the main things, this is something I've learned really recently. So since being diagnosed with ADHD, I've sort of been reading a lot and learning a lot more about particularly how my brain works compared to a neurotypical brain and things like that. And one thing I kept reading, which was a phrase I wish somebody had said to me when I was younger, and that I would definitely say to my younger self, is that your thoughts about yourself aren't evidence about yourself. So what I mean by that is, you know, when you think, oh, I'm really bad at this, or I'm really ugly, or I'm really, whatever, have you got the evidence to back that up? Because if you haven't, then that thought is lying to you. And your thoughts will do that. They will, you know, work against you sometimes, because it's that old ancient part of our brain that is trying to protect us from, you know, us being eaten by wolves on the savannah or whatever. So that's that part of that brain that tells you, oh, you sure you want to do that? Is that dangerous? But it's not giving you evidence. It's giving you fear. And just being aware of that has made such a big difference. But when I have these negative thoughts of going, I can't say yes to that job they've offered me because I won't be able to do it because I'll be bad at it. And you can go, where's your evidence that you'll be bad at it? When have you been bad at it before? When have you, And when you break it down, and sometimes you go, oh yeah, I've got the evidence, you're right, you're not good at that. Other times you go, oh yeah, hang on, no, I can do that. I have done it before and I can do it again, you know. And so that idea that thoughts aren't evidence and that they're just that, they're just thoughts, and you can ignore them. You can observe them and you can ignore them. And you can tell them to go away.
Excellent.
That is fantastic advice. That you know, that's absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Just,
Thank you.
if only we'd all told ourselves that, but we can remember it every day.
Yeah.
I can't imagine you ever think you'd be bad at anything. I think you're wonderful.
Oh God.
And it's just been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. I hope everybody out there has already listened to every single episode of We Are History, but if you haven't, then you need to go and check that out wherever you get podcasts. And also, Angela's going to be going on tour next spring. So tickets are going to go on sale for that quite shortly and probably sell out very fast, I should think. And you can find those at her website, which is angelabarnescomedy.co.uk.
It's been such a treat. I can't tell you to chat to you today. It really has, Angela. I mean, what the listeners won't know is we had a little bit of a skirmish, didn't we, to record all this. The internet decided to do its own thing. But we did it. The gremlins were in, and you were so lovely about it all. And we kind of got to know you between the recording, which was just great. So it's been a real treat. And I have to say, I am determined. I am on a mission here to find a way of securing you a long overdue visit to Ambridge, and you never know, we might even involve a G&T at the Dower House, you know. We'll work on that.
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I could die happy if that happened. I really could. That's the last thing on my bucket list.
Oh, Angela, take very good care. It's just been fantastic. Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to our One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. If you'd like to see behind-the-scenes clips and bonus content, please visit our Facebook page, One Stiletto in the Grave podcast. And if you'd like to ask any questions, follow us on Twitter at OneStiletto65. This podcast is produced by Raggedy House Productions and the music composed by Tom Smith. See you next time!